All right, thank you everyone for coming tonight. We have three panelists here from Jericho and Underhill who live on similar communities to intentional communities. So I thought I'd have you guys introduce yourselves, and I do some slides where you can talk more in depth, but maybe just like a quick introduction, and then we'll go into the slides.
My name's John Hunt, and I live in Underhill up on Maple Leaf Road at the old Maple Leaf Farm. And we have an intentional community of sorts up there. I, in college, got interested in intentional community living. There's a cooperative house called Slade, which used to be on campus, started in the 70s and was on campus until the 2010s, and then went off campus and is still existing off campus. And that was inspiring for me. And so then kind of a journey for like a decade or so until we found this opportunity when Maple Leaf went bankrupt and then sat for a little bit. It was kind of this amazing opportunity for us. And so we're up there doing education, also outdoor education, community education, permaculture, and
Hi all, my name is Maeve McBride. I use she, her pronouns. I live over on Skunk Hollow. Oh my God. Yeah, okay. Brain fart. Skunk Hollow Road. And our little parcel of 10 acres we are calling Skunk Hollow Commons. I come to a love of trying to live differently from a lot of different angles. I have only lived in community, in intentional community in short bits, both through spiritual community and then also through activist community. But both have been like very profound experiences, and experiences where I felt like that I could just be so much deeper, more deeply tied to people. And so what ours is still aspirational in a way, because we don't have people yet living on this parcel with my partner and our two kids. However, we are bringing people to that land as much as we can. So we have a monthly gathering of women and non-binary folks who come and do a gathering, a council, land reconnection work together. We also have hosted like community work days on the land where we're planting trees and inviting everyone in the community meals as well, and making our way towards some of the hurdles that were mentioned by somebody in terms of like, how can we actually legally structure this so that we can have more people on the land. And I come from an environmental background. I used to do river restoration and water stuff. And so I am really interested in how we can live as stewards on the land and really take care of the land, sometimes in ways that are not in alignment with like what the state of Vermont thinks should happen on land and with water and wastewater and that sort of thing. So we can get into that later, maybe if somebody has curiosity about that. But that's a little bit about us.
All right. My name is Jake Kornfeld. I am one of the owners of the Farm Upstream. We are over on Wee River Road. We bought our farm in 2023 with the help of Jericho and Underhill Land Trust, the town of Jericho, the Vermont Land Trust, and a whole bunch of other people. If we're taking it back to the origin stories, my first intentional living experience was all through college. I lived with a bunch of people who just shared an appreciation of the outdoors. And we had we called it a non-Greek co-ed fraternal society. It's what it evolved into, but we owned the house as members, and it made my rent all through college incredibly affordable. So I learned that sort of like financial incentive of intentional community in a sort of housing context really early on. And those are still my closest friends. And I have been sort of like looking for that sort of connection ever since. And I have found some semblance of it in what we're currently doing. We bought our land with, it's myself, my partner, another couple, and our friend. And so 5 of us own the land and 4 of us live there. Conservation is what allowed us to get access to that land in the first place. And conservation is also what's going to limit our ability to develop any further housing on that land. So that's a really interesting dynamic to talk about, think about, sort of like how do we create space for both things and protect important lands and also create opportunities for people. I think they can go hand in hand incredibly well if we are intentional about it. What else did I want to say? Oh, just that, yeah, I think the piece with intentional living, intentional communities is that, like Maeve said, it's also about sort of who has access to the land. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is just bring people to the farm and make the farm a focal point of community building. And, you know, we had 50 people out harvesting squash this weekend, and that was so awesome. And I'm sad that, you know, we can't offer more housing opportunities, but we can offer a lot of opportunity to connect with the land and the community in all sorts of ways centered around food. So I'm also just so heartened whenever I'm in a room of people like this, because this stuff is really hard to pull off. And when there's this many people interested, like I was reading about the Wisdom House project the other day, I think that's incredible. And I have loved the Front Porch Forum series that you have written, Chuck, on zoning in Jericho. I think that's been awesome. So it's just great to be in a community where people are actually engaged and want to see things be intentional. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, guys. So I've put together a little slideshow. This first picture here, it's Eco Village at Ithaca in Ithaca, New York. It's interesting. If you go to the next slide, Dave. So a small slide here on what are intentional communities, and I pulled a definition from it's the Foundation for Intentional Community. There's sort of a international organization that keeps kind of a directory of intentional communities around the world, and they define it very broadly as a group of people who have chosen to live together or share resources on the basis of common values. So those common values can vary widely. Some communities might be formed around sort of environmental consciousness. Some of the earliest intentional communities were sort of religious monasteries where they're working and living together, like ashrams. And in the US, there's been it sort of evolved out of the like countercultural movement in the 1960s and Back to the Land initiatives. And one of the oldest in the country is called Twin Oaks in Virginia, which was established in 1967. And today we have lots of different names for intentional communities, like communes, which maybe was kind of derogatory in the past, but and then eco-villages, co-housing communities where each one has, or each family or person has like their own living space, but it's in the same community. Cooperative living, and a lot more. And yeah, it seems a lot of common features of intentional communities is mixing housing with communal space, some amount of food production, and maybe economic activities. Go forward, Dave. And some pictures here from Maeve's property. I don't know if there was more you wanted to say now, or.
No, I mean, just a visual for folks if you don't know the space. We bought the property in 2021. One of the things that attracted me to it is that it is a single family at this point, but the house is very amenable to being like a common house because it has big open space, a pretty big kitchen, and so that has always been our vision. It also has these 3 outbuildings in the back. The central one is a barn. And so we have a goat herd right now, which is also part of our community that I neglected to mention. Jacqueline, one of the farmers at the Farm Upstream, and actually Matt has been by to participate in the goat co-op. And so we have people coming every week to help with milking the goats, and we have this exchange of like milk for labor. So, and we, it was basically a suburban lot, as most of them are in Jericho, I will just say, in the agricultural zone. But we have tried to, bring back garden space and, actually use the pasture as pasture. So you can go to the next slide. I don't know how many, did you put all of them in there, Adam?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
3 of them, I think.
Cool, yeah. So just, this is a picture of our altar at the monthly gathering that I mentioned. And there are some pictures of our goats and people in the community loving them up and enjoying them. So, yeah. And then upper left is a picture of us just having a community dinner. That was our tree planting a couple years ago. Chris helped out with that. Thank you, Chris. I don't know if anybody else in here was there. And then lower left is just kind of a reminder that we are living in an age of crisis and collapse. And so, that's me farming on a really smoky day with my mask on. And I think, someone expressed being skeptical about if people are willing to give up their individual lifestyles. And I think that's essential if we're going to survive as a human species. So that's just my plug for that.
Plug for species survival.
Yeah, right? Let's do it.
And John, I have some pictures here from ReTribe.
So we have different gatherings. The gathering in the upper right is in the spring and fall we have like a community day, work day. We do some work on the land and then have a fire and meal together. We usually make music and sing. And then the bottom left is our outdoor kitchen, sharing a meal, and the bottom right is people pickling, in the fall, pickling things that they grew in the gardens. Julia just sent a bunch of pictures. There's just different community events. Some of it we often have a solstice gathering. There's people together doing apple cider, which wasn't on our land, but was people from our land. There's in the bottom right is like a mountain honoring ceremony. Our friend has studied with people from the Andes and the way that they relate with the mountains down there. And so we've been, trying to have that relationship with Mount Mansfield, Moosehead Mountain. We do a lot of sledding. We have great outdoor space up there, so sledding and skiing and things like that.
And that one picture there, are they braiding grass?
I can't really see. Maybe. Sorry, I have poor eyesight. Maybe they're braiding sweetgrass. Is maybe what they're doing, and then also inoculating mushroom logs. We've done that a lot. We have so many logs. We actually didn't do it this year and this has been a poor year with the dryness. But sometimes we have so many mushrooms we can barely eat them all. When we do it as a community, we can produce a lot of mushrooms. So.
Let's see. So that's the 5 of us. There's also a 6th. His name is Silas. He is 16 months old, and there's going to be a 7th in a month or so. And I think that's a big part of the intentional aspect for us, is that we have seen our friends really struggle who have kids to find childcare, find babysitters, just feeling lonely in parenthood, and we'll see how it goes. It's early days, but it seems nice to have neighbors who have a kid around our kid's age. Tucker, who's the one with the little cap on, he has 2 little boys who also are around the farm a lot, and so just that aspect of community. It's not like I don't know. I think to me, it doesn't need a lot of ritual and ceremony necessarily. I think that's a great element to bring into it. But for us, it's more about just a practical functioning of our business and of our lives and an ability to pay our taxes, and has these added perks of we're going out to dinner. Will you guys take our kid? That's pretty cool. And then in terms of the like actual community, that little blue house, that's it right now. So the door on the right is Spencer and Jack's house, and the door on the left is our house. And one of the things that was really we were really excited about with this house is that it's zoned for a 4-bedroom house. And so we just took the inside and kind of turned it into a big box and then rebuilt it as a duplex. But because it was already a 4-bedroom home, we could turn it into a duplex and we didn't need any permits. Like, we asked the zoning administrator, hey, what do we need to do? And he was like, nothing. It sounds like you guys are just remodeling your house. That's cool. Have a nice time. So these are like the odd little opportunities that maybe exist when people have the tools. And I think, I don't know what you all want to talk about, but one of the things that I was like, all right, what can I actually offer to a space like this is just having figured out what it is to form a landholding business and set up all of those agreements with 5 other owners and think through all of the potential conflicts and what happens in the event of death and divorce and what happens if somebody just wants to move, all of those things that can kind of get in the way of people buying land together. Because it was a fascinating process.
Thank you. Oh, I did also prepare some questions for our panelists here. So the first one is, how do you think intentional communities could enhance or support the resiliency of Jericho and Underhill? So whoever would like to start first. Give you a minute to think.
We didn't get these ahead of time. Okay.
I think you did send them to us.
I did send them, but maybe you got a little buried.
I mean, I have plenty of thoughts on this. I think as a young person in Jericho, something I hear a lot from the community of Jericho is that it's an aging population and there's no affordable housing and there's no opportunity for young people to move here. And I think that's by and large true. But I think we also are in a community where there's a lot of really large parcels and homes that if we're able to be divided up in a, less land intensive way, would allow us to bring in more people without sort of destroying the character of the community, right? So people are here because they like that it's a rural place and it's got proximity to more urban places. And I think we can sort of have our cake and eat it too if we're intentional in the way we develop our communities. So I don't know what that'll mean for people. And the other piece, I guess, is that it's also context-based, right? Like every single group of people is going to have their own set of values and their own interests. And so I think if Jericho could just sort of, as a town, facilitate the process for people a little bit, it would go a long way. I don't know.
A couple of things I think about resiliency in response to this question. One is like personally how I've been trying to live my life in my nuclear family, and one of those is to kind of have one part of my family still in the like current systems and one part outside of. And I think by living in intentional communities or just intentionally living lower on, getting out of the rat race or living lower on the pole, so to speak, or on the ladder, I guess you could say, is I think that is like, has been in our family at least, a tack for kind of preparedness for what may come. We don't know when ultimate collapse is going to happen, but like if we have animals and we have gardens and we have a pond, like all those are really good things to have, right? Basic human needs, as well as like, oh, my partner who does have the regular job has those benefits as well. So there's that like like immediate resiliency. And then I think the other thing I think is a community scale is like the more that we have places like the Farm Upstream, like what we're trying to do, and John's place too, is like being connected and also receiving and giving back to the land, with how we're using it for animals husbandry, how we're cultivating the land, all of that I think again is like the seeds of feeding more Vermonters. Certainly local foods are just a small fraction of what everyone in Vermont needs to eat, but you know, when you can't go to Costco anymore, yeah, what are we gonna do? And I think what I know I'm such a downer. But anyway, I think, you know, if we have these little seeds, even if everyone isn't raising goats yet, like we could share our goats with y'all when you need them.
Yeah, I think maybe like resiliency, I was thinking in one way, I think community is really good for mental health. And I think a lot of people are struggling more and more with mental health. So having people around that you can talk to and different ages, I think is really good. Yeah, and especially beyond the nuclear family, I think like raising kids is really hard. And if there's not elders or like young people who can help with childcare, it can be really challenging, especially if people are trying to work a lot. So I think that can be really beneficial just in people's like well-being. Yeah, I think ideally intentional community is also connected to the land. So like what Maeve was saying in terms of food and medicine and, you know, having resources like that and having a connection and cultivating the land. I believe a lot in permaculture, and I feel like, you know, the land, like the forest has rebounded in terms of trees in Vermont, but the abundance or resiliency of the land hasn't rebounded in terms of like, you know, there's very few nut trees that are still around. A lot of the medicine plants are not back. They didn't just, you know, come back, and could take a lot of human support to bring them back, you know, and also wildlife could be more abundant in terms of its health. Like, you know, we could have a larger deer population and, you know, moose and things like that for hunting. And so I think also agriculture, growing animals and growing crops, but also, yeah, you know, having a relationship where the land we're stewarding it, I think can really increase resiliency over time. Yeah.
Second question here is, how can towns or individuals support intentional communities?
My undergrad degree was in public policy, and it's usually the first place my brain goes when there's a question like that. And I mean, this Chuck brought it up earlier, but this town's policies are not particularly friendly for the building of alternative communities. And whether there's intention to that or not, I don't know enough of the context of this town. I've only lived in Jericho for 2 years. So there's a lot of opportunity, I guess, in policies, state level, local level, county level. There's a Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission that actually has like a lot of sway, a lot of power, and they're fairly progressive, but could be more so. And I think those policies are hard to write and they take time and resources. So just putting the time and resources towards them is also important. And then as far as individuals, I think people just have to try stuff. I think a lot of it's not going to work. And I think we should keep talking to each other about what does and doesn't work. So I'd be really curious to hear like what didn't work about starting an intentional community 40 years ago or whenever you said you tried to do that. Like I'm curious, you know, what was it that got in the way and like how could we do it different? You know, I just don't know how much of that stuff gets transferred along. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for
Your story about
yeah, well, for us, part of, you know, like Maple Leaf is somewhat grandfathered in, or it is grandfathered in. We wouldn't be able to build what we have right now in where we built or where it is built And so I think the town somewhat recognizes like something's got to happen there. It's a big place and you have to be creative. And so they were able to work with us, because the housing, from my understanding, in Underhill as well, there's no apartments. You can't have apartments. And I think that you can have duplexes, but it's challenging to have multi-family or family multi-homes on one property that's not seen as apartments or going against the zoning. So it's sort of, and I think, Underhill and Jericho, they don't want to be built up in a really crazy way like some towns have been. So it makes sense in some ways, the restrictive zoning, but then they're maybe not seeing like a vision of something else, an intentional community and how that can work, or a co-housing. So I think there's definitely could be help on the zoning level so that people can understand it and see how it works. I think also in Vermont, I have like people in my generation, a lot of my friends are not going to live in Chittenden County. Most of them are in Lamoille County or further north because there's less zoning and it's easier to live up there and have less oversight from the town. And it is challenging. I think the rules around septic is just like a pretty huge financial hurdle for people getting onto land and like having to have a septic system when there's a lot of composting systems that are, totally safe and good and better for the earth, and would make a smaller hurdle for people to be able to live more simply with less money on the land.
Yeah, that brings up a good point around I was with a group in kind of doing group formation stuff before I moved to Jericho. I had lived previously in South Burlington, just in a little parcel in a little neighborhood. And we were, during the pandemic, like meeting as a group and thinking about, which is often how in intentional community, like workshops, they say you should start with the group and do the group formation. Because that's often the hardest thing is actually the culture, that we don't have that culture that we've all grown up in. And so anyway, as part of that, we were kind of hearing from a lot of other people that had started communities, and many people who want to live in intentional communities like this often seek out the towns, like John's just saying, that don't have as much zoning and so don't have restrictions, can have tiny houses and, that sort of thing. So it's just kind of, interesting to think about that. I think relatedly, what I wanted to say about how towns or individuals can support intentional communities is I really think that the biggest hurdle is actually people getting used to this idea of living together. And I think so that really is cultural change. And so we can all do a part in that. You're doing a part in that by just coming to this thing, right, tonight, and potentially spreading the good word about it. And I think the other way is like, talking about it in schools and, doing that sort of, coming out to the, community squash harvest like they just had at the Farm Upstream, and slowly having that become more and more of what we care about, what we put our energy towards, what we dedicate our lives to.
Yeah. So one more question here. It's kind of two-part. First is, what excites you about this model of living, and where do you see your community in 10, maybe 20 years?
I'll start because Jake's been starting. To be honest, what excites me about this? I mean, I don't know. I feel like I've said it already in what I've shared, but I just think, we need it on so many levels. Like John was saying about mental health, growing food together, getting through these times that are just going to be harder. Resistance work, where fascism is here, not to be more downer, but it's true. So, I think about it just for like personal security, honestly. But I think, to be honest, like the Skunk Hollow Commons, like I think that I am gonna give this a good push of energy, this is the year for me for dedicating to that and to really try to do that. The legal setting up and putting ourselves more out there to kind of see who else is interested. And then honestly, I'm not sure that I'm going to try for 10 years to make it work. If it doesn't work, I actually think that I might abandon it, just because if there are too many hurdles, and just try to find a different community to go and live with that's already established. Because it is, I think, just to acknowledge that it is a lot of work, and it's not something that I can do as an individual on my own. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that reality. And it's hard to do this. I think both of these folks would say that too. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I think humans have been living in community, that's what, evolutionarily, for so long, that this is just a little blip in our time, how individual and isolated we become, and we can see how unhealthy it is. And yeah, I think it can, just bring up, I think tribalism can be dangerous in some ways, and the smaller sort of we identify as a tribe, if we just live in a house, then sort of everybody is the other tribe that's sort of our enemy, and we cloister, and so having larger communities and connection, I just think is really good for people, and healthy and important. Yeah, so for us, the past, we've been there 7 years now, which is kind of crazy because it's a long time, 7 years, and it seems like it's gone by so fast. And a lot of it has been just managing the place and getting our systems down and fixing things that are broken, repairing rot, figuring out really how everything can work well. Because we didn't design the place was built, and we just have kind of filling the shoes in a way. So yeah, 10 to 20 years, sometimes I walk around and I think about that. We've never really approached the town in terms of if we were to build more housing, what the town would think about that. Would we need to subdivide? We already have 3 septic systems on the property. That kind of thing. But at the same time, the way that our housing is set up right now, it's a community living program. And most people's housing is a room, and everything else is communal space, which works for people. But often once you're a couple or you have children, it doesn't really work. People want a little more private space. So we've thought about that, how can we create more private space on the property? Could we retrofit things that are already there? Or would we need to build, new structures, and maybe they wouldn't have septic, they wouldn't have running water, and the town would be more okay with that if it's a yurt and they have the access to communal space. Or so we've thought about those things a little, but I would say in some ways it's still kind of little in terms of our future thinking. And I often, thinking sort of as Maeve's been talking, we produce some food on the property, but we don't have to. There's good farmers who are producing good food in the area, and we don't have to. And so it's somewhat more of a hobby or a passion. But, in our lifetime, how much will we see the really necessity to really be producing a lot of our own food, or creating, more of our own clothing, or what will we see? I never really know. So I think about that as well, how much of a sort of homestead do we need to be? And I always am somewhat banking on that a little bit, making sure that we're increasing soil fertility and planting chestnuts, whether we eat them or not. I try to do that. And ideally, in the 20 years, there's a very abundant place. Maybe it's all just bears and deer that eat it, but ideally it's very abundant. That's what I'd like.
I feel like, just to address the prepper thing for a second, I think I've thought about it a lot. And I think where I've ended up is that I think the community that's going to impact us in those times is the entire town of Jericho, and our little pocket of 52 acres with 12 acres of tillable soil is going to be a fraction of what we actually need. And maybe in this community as a whole, there is what we need, but I'm pretty sure if you all are screwed, I'm screwed. So I think the intentional community piece of that is bringing people to the farm and just developing neighborly relations that are good and trusting each other. And so I'm always like, I don't know. Sometimes I go to that place of like, do we have what we need in the event of a collapse? And I don't think that our little community is ever going to aspire to like provide everything that we're going to need for ourselves. So what excites me is just the ease and camaraderie of living next to people who I care about. And hopefully in 10 years, we're still close friends, and disputes over like where the gardens should be, or damn it, Silas's music is too loud, haven't like torn us apart. I don't think that's my goal. And there's one like weird little stipulation in our easement that we could have some farm labor housing, and so maybe we'll be able to exercise that in the next 10 to 20 years and be able to bring some more people onto the land. But it's an outside chance, I think.
It's very informative and interesting to hear about your experiences. And just a conclusion slide, and you could leave it up, I think, Dave, because I just put Transition Town Jericho. We do have a little website, but I think we're still updating it. Mainly right now, we've been putting on public informational talks like these. Sure. Yeah, I guess we can talk a bit more.
So there was a question earlier about what is Transition Town Jericho and what is our stated purpose. And Laura, you can jump in anytime that you would like. But Transition Town movement is an international movement. It was started back in the 70s, I believe, in England. And there's a very prominent member of the movement who travels around the world and promotes the idea that all communities are in transition. And whether that transition is from within or it is a transition that is as a result of what's going on in the world around them, and how does the community adapt and model itself based on what's going on outside of the community. So as Adam indicated, Transition Town Jericho has been more of a speakers bureau in the last 10 years that we've been together, and we've been doing projects such as this to promote information, sharing information about different ways of living in our world, in somebody else's world, and perceptions on how that living should be, and how can we do better in our world to be better people in our community. There's a couple of projects that Transition Town Jericho has done over the years. We have a kids garden contest that we've done the last 4 years. We award 10 4-by-6 foot gardens to kids in the Jericho Underhill community to promote gardening, so that the kids can have something of their own to produce whatever they would like, flowers or vegetables or so forth. And that gives them a foot in, it gives them an opportunity to have something of their own and to work on something and to have results from that, whether the results are bad or good. We've had, both of those things. Transition Town doesn't require that the kids maintain their gardens or do anything in particular with their gardens. They just have them. And we feel that that's an important thing to do. So next year, 10 more gardens will go out. That'll be 50 gardens. And we're really pleased with that. We did a squash harvest down at the Farm Upstream on Saturday morning, or at least that's when I was there, was Saturday morning. But one of the things that's gone on is Tucker, who is the farmer for Bone Mountain Farm, has done what we call an extra row project, where he goes out and he plants a row of butternut squash has an extra row, and he has assigned that row harvest to the Transition Town team. We go out annually about this time of year and harvest that, and then distribute those squash around to food shelf in various communities from Colchester to Williston, and obviously our local food shelf here, and so forth. And then one of our bigger projects was a couple, 3 years ago now. Transition Town went in front of the town of Jericho and said that we would like to start a food hub which is something that we felt was important in respect to a transitioning movement, in that we believe that we can do better to feed ourselves. And we want to encourage us as a community to feed ourselves. And one of the things that we've been focusing on is to getting the word out to the community to take advantage of the great food that is being produced in our towns by many great farmers. But it also goes to another level where we have sugarers who produce many great things, and then we have those people that take the raw vegetables and fruits of the community and make them into desserts or make them into meals, and we call them the makers. And it's important that you see and understand who those people are, because they're important to the community, because they know how to take that raw material and produce something that is acceptable to people in the community. So it's a broad reach. The Jericho Food Hub joined up with a food commission in Underhill, created the Jericho Underhill Food Hub. It has now about 18 members on its committee, and there's a lot that's been going on. It's way too much to talk about right now, but a lot that's going on. I have a flyer that we sent out in the mail. Many of you hopefully have it, which is a list of all the farmers and the makers in the community that wanted to get in on this project, so that you can, as a community member, can open that up and say, I would like bread made by someone local in the community, and you know who that person is and where to get it. I would like vegetables, I would like meat, I would like, and it's really important from our perspective that we support our local makers and growers, because without our local makers and growers, we can't thrive and be strong. And unless we're a strong community, we can't help other people. If we're always in the need of needing help, then how can we be strong enough to reach out and go beyond that to help other people? So it's important that we look around and see who our growers and makers are, go to those people, and the Farm Upstream is an example. There are many, many farms in the Jericho Underhill area, and take advantage of what services they have. And the thing that I want, that's very important from my perspective, is as we go to work and we live the way we live, and think it's important that, that we take care of ourselves. The people that run the farms have those same needs, wants, and desires. And when you say, well, they're too expensive, well, look at what they have to do to make those things happen, and realize that for them to be strong and vibrant, they have to do and charge what they charge today. Once everybody starts buying, you've got economies of scale, and then prices can drop and people can better afford those things. But if you don't grasp early, jump in fast, take advantage of these folks, then we're going to miss out. That's my opinion. So that's where Transition Town Jericho has been and where we're going. We're actually going to be part of the food hub, and our main goal in Transition Town Jericho is to do just this, is to get in front of people, educate people of opportunities and things that can be possible in our community. But it's only possible if there are people like you guys that are interested enough to do something and stand up, like Maeve is doing, like ReTribe is doing, and like the Farm Upstream is doing. I think that's what's really important.
Maybe I can add to that. When I moved to Jericho, we had Village University. Some people remember that, where people from the town would teach each other skills, like a skill share, but
Interesting.
kind of, and so I personally see Transition Town Jericho as a continuation of that. Just number one is educating, but then, so before the food hub was formed, we had a series of meetings about other, hubs in the state. We did a lot of education, and that ended up in quite the action of producing a food hub right here. So it sometimes starts, the seed is educating, and that is a big part of our purpose. But as for right now, I thought, since we have some time, if there were questions for the panelists around this intentional communities, we have some time for discussion. So Adam, why don't you?
Yeah, go ahead.
We may be, the zoning is an obstacle. I know where you live, you have 10 acres, but it's illegal to have more than 2 dwellings, which is an obstacle to what you're trying to do. We may be closer, we may be within reach of making some of these changes. Jericho has long been supportive of intentional communities. There's about 500 households in Jericho, about 25% of all Jericho households are in an intentional, values-based intentional community, where people have gotten together and they've signed contracts banning anything other than single-family homes, specifying what pets are allowed, house colors, clotheslines, trees, all these things. I mean, Jericho is dominated by these in the, in this part of town. And with the town's encouragement, the town has required these communities to sign these intentional values-based agreements to make happen. So the town has long been supportive of this. The trouble is you have a different set of values that have been expressed, kind of in these communities. One of the things is that anywhere outside these communities, the town has conflated large single-family homes with agricultural life and rural life, and somehow that a triplex is antithetical to rural life, and we need to start changing kind of that point of view. Only 15% of the households in Chittenden County can afford the median price of a new home in Jericho. We have 70% more people in their 60s than in their 30s. People in the 30s can't afford to live here. MMU has lost 45% of its enrollment. We don't have people in the 30s and 40s living here who have the children. Jericho women actually have a higher fertility rate than the rest of Vermont. It's just that we don't have that many women in childbearing. The Housing Committee has advanced a zoning change that I think addresses a lot of what you're trying to do, which is saying that for every house, every dwelling you add that's less than 1,200 square feet, you don't have to add more land. So right now, in a place where you're limited to 2 dwellings, if you wanted to add a 3rd dwelling, you'd have to add 10 acres. But under this zoning change, you could add small dwellings. And the select board has turned it down 3 times, the last 3 zoning revisions. It's going to come back to them hopefully in about 6 months. But we need to make, the push. And I think the combination of the housing crisis, I think that the general support of agriculture and what you're doing, and I think a recognition that that we need to do something different. I'm hopeful that the town is going to make some sort of a change, and I think positioning it as, an HOA community, using the language that they have already supported, as opposed to making it sound something a little bit kind of offbeat that you don't kind of understand and kind of let me explain it to you. But basically what you're talking about, there's a lot with a homeowner's agreement, just like many other people in Jericho have. It's just that this is kind of what the difference is that we want to see, some smaller homes. I mean, right now, Jericho has 4 luxury developments permitted and under construction right now. None of them in a village center. Anywhere from 24 to 45 bedrooms, all allocated to single-family homes, where it's illegal to build a triplex. And we need to start. We really need to start pushing, and I think positioning as something that is aligned with agricultural values, I think could be helpful, and then use the language that they already use. We're talking about a planned unit development and an HOA, and this is what it looks like. A bunch of smaller houses on one lot.
Thank you. Looks like we have a few more questions here, so we'll start over here.
I really found this very interesting, and obviously it's being recorded, and I hope your intention is to perhaps post on Front Porch Forum a summary of the meeting and have a link possibly to the program and to our discussion, because I think others would benefit, and I think. Chuck's certainly thought about housing and a variety of things more than I have, but I guess I would suggest you explore something different than using the definitions that are confining or constricting today. You're not a homeowners association. That really actually is upsetting to me. I get that it makes sense to build on what is acceptable. I understand that approach, but in this context, it doesn't feel right, so I hope that you can say, like a homeowners association,
yes, that's what I'm saying.
This is something, and it's called this. Rather, you're not trying to pretend and use the same phrasing and definitions, because that's not who you are. And I did just also want to say that my husband and I were help gathering squash on Saturday morning, and others in the room were too, and it was really gratifying. It's one of those experiences when you're volunteering to help someone else or another entity, and you too benefit because it makes you feel so good. You're giving, and you're meeting your neighbors, maybe seeing old friends and acquaintances, and making some new friends and acquaintances. So I just thought it was great. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's a question over there.
Yeah, a quick question for the panel. So say you got a little group of some friends, a few people. What's your thoughts on trying to create a community compared to trying to find a community that already exists? And I don't know if you've done both, or you just have some knowledge on either way. What's some thoughts?
Hypothetically, yeah.
The friends are not here.
No.
I don't know them.
Yeah, I think the main thing that for me that comes to mind really quick is like having good communication skills, because this community is hard, because we haven't necessarily lived in it outside of our family, which might not even be that many people, like maybe just like mom, dad, and like one sibling or something. And that's like a very structured sort of home. And so if you start to get with other people, it can be challenging. So I think nonviolent communication as a model, and there's like a bunch of branches off of that, but that kind of model of communication is really helpful. I think also, I think structure is really helpful, it's always like a balance of everything. Like too much structure will feel restricting. People don't have freedom. They will want to leave, but not enough, which is sometimes where we tend to, because our culture is very structured, too much in some ways, not enough in others. But if you totally go towards like no structure and just have trust, like often that falls apart, unfortunately. even just, like structures around chores, like that kind of thing is helpful. So to communicate about it and to structure it. I think also the balance of communal space and private space is really big. If there's, like sometimes co-housings, there's almost not enough communal space. It's kind of like, are we a community depending on the co-housing? But then sometimes if you're all in one house, like there's almost no way to not have conflict. Like if you all share one sink, like that can be hard. So I don't know, those would be some things I would share, because conflict is gonna arise. And so being able to ease the conflict and communicate through it, like those are really key. And then I think also, like we are talking about like zoning and things like that, like thinking about where you're looking, like if you're looking for a house and an ownership, or if it's a rental, like I think it's also really possible. A lot of landlords or owners like would like a solid people to live in a house for a long time, and that can work well. I know there's a lot of houses in Burlington that are doing that have been working with the landlord for 15 years, 20 years. So that's also possible. Those are a few things. I mean, there's a lot, I guess, but
My advice is try to do it before you have children. No, just because my partner and I sought communal living once we had kids, and it seemed like the only two the options of like living in Burlington in a house that I heard someone else, has been in that kind of situation, or like Slade, or like a Slade-like place, but post school, is so not doable with kids, really, right? It's a certain phase of life. And so our options for looking for communities, which we did a lot of, as far as like northern, like down in Massachusetts and over in Chatham, New York, and talked to a lot of places. What I kept getting really disheartened about is that it seemed like there was still this economic barrier, because they were the ones, at least that were, on the FIC directory, were like, $300,000 to $500,000 homes. And it was kind of, a cute chicken co-op, as part of like living closer together. Whereas I really had a different vision of what I wanted to be in or potentially create. One word on creation is like that group that I described, that we were coming together for backyard sits around the fire during the pandemic, was a group that I felt had a lot of same values. It was like a friend from church, and it was like activist friends of mine. And what was really interesting is we went through, actually, like the FIC has this great workshop that's like basically kind of group formation. If you want to start a community, they have like this whole block of like steps you can take. And that was really helpful, because even though we had so much in common, one of the things that split that group was two of them really were, although we were all like activist environmentalist types, two of them were really more about rewilding, and like didn't want to have domesticated animals, felt that domesticated animals were kind of part of the whole colonial project, which I can't argue with, right? That is like, I do think that is true. And yet I had this kind of deep yearning to like, I kind of want to try that. I like, people have been, herding goats for like 10,000 years. Like, let's give this a go. So I just say like that group, even if you're friends, like, doing that group formation work is really important.
I would say just do something. Anything, start small and form an LLC if that's what you want to do, and figure out how to have operating agreements, or just have some intentional conversations about what you actually want and how you're going to get there, or like pick one thing to anchor yourselves to and then build from that. Is it the people in the room? Great, that's the group, and we're going to build that. And is it the place? Okay, well, I'm going to find somewhere in Chittenden County or Franklin County that I just like can make work, and I'll find the people. So just like pick one thing. And structure is key, because you are going to deal with people who are not going to make it easy for you. Like, presumably you'll need to get a loan if you want to buy land, or even just convince a landlord that you have your act together. And like, any kind of structure is helpful to get yourselves on the same page and also convince the rest of the world that you're serious about what you're doing.
I really like the idea of multi-generational households. And we've gone away from that model as a culture because, the kids grow up and they move away. And I've been reminded about how, so the old people, they die off and then the kids are like, oh, now we gotta clean out grandma and grandpa's house, nobody wants their stuff, what are we gonna do? Throw it all in the garbage, give it to Goodwill. But I'm thinking about, okay, so say that somebody my age joins an intentional community. And so I'm living there and I'm still, vigorous and I've got all this experience, I've got all these skills, I know a bunch of stuff, and I'm useful. But 20 years from now, I might need a lot of help. Would I be able to stay in an intentional community and be cared for throughout my old age, all the way to death? Or would the community just say, you're really a leech on our resources, go somewhere else? What are the general thoughts about what happens as people age in an intentional community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does somewhat depend on like the structure of the community, because that even happens with just within a family. Like some families take their elder in and care for them till death. Some are like, we can't handle this, and they put them in a nursing home or something. And I've seen that with my own family, and all my grandparents have passed now. And that is a challenge because it's also similar with young children where it's like, well, this is a lot of work to care for a young child. And in both ways, I've seen communities that have struggled with both, where the elder population is very big and there's not a lot of young people anymore, and it's becoming really hard for the community to function, and also where it's really hard for a community because of like the requirements for families to be there. It's really more for young people or for people who are their kids have already flown the nest. So I think it's structure, because it does take resources to care for a person who can't totally care for themselves. And so ideally the community has the resources to do that. But it takes that structuring and knowing that. But there's definitely, intentional communities, some of these old ones like Twin Oaks that have graveyards and have definitely seen the elders go all the way and have worked it. Twin Oaks is a income sharing. It's a commune community. So, there's the people are putting a lot of their resources into it, and it's holding the resources for everybody, versus some like a co-housing. If you were an elder in a co-housing, you might not work unless you personally had the finances to pay someone there to take care of you. So I think it would depend on the community, but it's totally possible and is being done. Yeah.
I have two thoughts. First is just like a thing that, I don't know if it's a quote, but it's saying maybe the cost of community is inconvenience. And I think sometimes that's true. And I think that's true in what you're talking about, that if you have someone who contributes to a community for 20 some years, they may need help for a few years consistently. And if you're a true part of that community, you're going to offer that even if it's inconvenient to you. And you're going to get something in return, which is the sense of community. I feel that way all the time, that I'm inconveniencing people by trying to build community or through my community. And I also show up for people, and that's sort of like the give and take. And, that's kind of the most extreme example, I think, is aging. And I guess my other thought on it is, and I don't know, this is just, what are my thoughts worth, right? Not a lot. But I think something I've seen that really floored me recently was what my parents and Spencer and Jack's parents and Corey's parents have been willing to do for us as we set up this phase of our lives. And I kind of was like, all right, well, once I'm out of high school, you guys like don't really owe me anything. You decided to make me, and now you've sort of gotten me to adulthood. So if you want to say see you later, that's fine. But they've continued to invest in us. And, like my mom painted our house. It was ridiculous. I couldn't believe she did it, but she did it. And I've just sort of been thinking like, man, the things that these people have done for me, I will happily do whatever they need me to do when they're no longer able to care for themselves. And that's that's a kind of community that is probably hard to build. Families are special, there's something different, but I hope that like I'll feel similar about Jack's parents. Jacqueline is our neighbor, you know, I'm not related, but like her dad helped me plumb my bathroom and like things like that, where they're just continually giving. And so I'm always looking for an opportunity to give back to them, and it hasn't really shown up yet, but it will at some point, and maybe I'll be able to reciprocate in that time. I don't know.
Too. She's one of our older members of our community, probably know her. She's in her upper 60s, and she contributes heavily to everything because she handled a lot of the bookkeeping and accounting side and the babysitting side, kid sitting side. So her work with us, even though she's an elder and she can't go lift logs above her head or anything like that, but she contributes hugely to the success of the community by helping take care of things that don't require a lot of physical strength, and just, you know, she can keep doing that stuff for a while, I think.
How many people does that ReTribe?
15, 16 with kids, with all the kids, I think, right? 16, 17.
Yeah.
I'll just say to Chris, to that question real quick, because I know there's another question, but I don't have personal experience of this, but I've heard about, like, I was working for a while with a nonprofit based at Findhorn in Scotland, and that's a long time community as well. And they spoke of how, at least in a community, not all are like this, certainly, but in ones where there are lots of different types of living situations, right? Like there's private space that could accommodate a family of 4, and there's studios and a diversity of living spaces that in some ways that really facilitates people in these changes of life, right? So that they could live in a community for different phases of life, because they might move, you know, while they have a family, they might be in that, you know, bigger space, but then as they age, or if they lose a spouse or something, they might, you know, downsize within that. And I feel like also, as we compare intentional communities to like the other model out there, is that is not flexible very much. You know, I mean, people do downsize and they move and they change households, but then they're often forced to leave communities, right? And so the community that even you've maybe have been able to cultivate outside of your home, you may have to abandon because you need a smaller house, which is a real shame, I think, you know, especially in that change of later stages of life when you really are becoming more dependent again, you know? So where was that other question?
I think Jake, you started to answer this, but I am curious about the ownership structure, like of the land. It sounds like maybe you have an LLC that owns the land and you like pay rent to the LLC, or, and John, you have a larger community. Like how's the ownership of the land shared?
Yeah, we'd love to hear how ReTribe is structured. But we're a multi-member LLC. So there are 5 owners of the business. We have one business that owns the farm. So the farm is a separate business and has separate agreements. And like the farm is much more equitable. We're all 20% owners. It's much easier to buy in and get out. The land was based on what we could pay to get in. So our percentages are split based on how much you've financially been able to contribute. And we worked with a lawyer to come up with operating agreements that dictate how decisions are made and what would constitute grounds for removal of someone from the LLC, and what happens in sort of all the worst case scenarios, and really basic stuff like how do we make any given decision, what's the threshold for a decision needing to be made. All of those things are spelled out, and we're sort of like looked over by an attorney who said, yeah, this is more or less sensible. He said something like, I mean, it's not crazy, but it's kind of crazy, and like it works. So yeah, that's for now. But also we haven't tested it. Nobody's died, so we'll see.
Yeah, so we were looking for land for a little while, maybe like 5 years, and at first we were a collective of different people, and we made an offer on a property in Johnson, and we were outbid, and that actually, but the reality of like, oh, we're gonna do this, actually like disbanded the collective, not in a bad way, like people broke up, one person like left the state and went to get his master's and things like that. It was just sort of like, is this really what I want to do? And so then it ended up being my wife and I and my mother-in-law, Jane, which made it easier. And so we're like a family collective, so we own it together. And it's a L3C, which is LLC, but with like a social or ecological benefit in mind. And so there's a land business that owns the land, and then ReTribe operates on the land and is like in relationship with the land business, as any other, like if someone else wanted to come do something else on the property. And kind of like what I was saying earlier with like having other family homes, we haven't really gotten to that stage. It was definitely easier, actually, in a way that everybody dropped out and it got so small. It was like challenging in some ways, but just being like family does make it easier. And then we've also thought like what is the future like in 10 and 20 years? How does that look? And so far we haven't actually had people really approach us like, I'm ready or I'm interested in what would that look like. We've had people sort of move towards it, like what would it look like if I like brought a yurt here and how could I sort of have ownership, but it hasn't gone further than conversations so far. So
yeah, and ours is just privately held between me and my spouse right now, but I have thought about this a lot, and I think a couple things I wanted to plug. One is that a learning from actually an FIC workshop where there are so many different models about how it can be held, and LLC I think was mentioned as like the simplest one, but I think one thing to think about is like there isn't any one right model. It often depends on your situation and like the financial situation of the parties involved. Do you need to build equity or not? Like so lots of options. The other thing I wanted to just plug, if people are interested in this, is that we're in the middle of this offering, but NOFA is offering this alternative land access and business structure webinar once a month. And so basically it's learning about different entities, not all in Vermont. Actually, the last one was about some rematriation of lands in Kentucky and Virginia, I believe. But some really interesting, like a farm cooperative up in Quebec was one of the speakers, and those have all been recorded and are available too. And some of them are getting into that exact question of like the structure. And I think the other thing for me, thinking about our particular parcel here in Jericho, is like, what is the structure that's going to allow me to get around some of these obstacles in terms of getting more people onto the land? So like we might want to find a farmer or incorporate as a farm, because then you are under different sets of regulations. So yeah.
But we did start a little late. I know you've had your hand up, so why don't you go ahead.
Wisdom House presented an idea to the Planning Commission of Jericho 5.5 years ago. And they loved our idea. We explained it, that they can't have it here because the zoning's awful. And they promised that they would change the zone and accommodate these ideas into the new zoning. So what I suggest is, not everyone here is from Jericho. Ask the town, have a good idea, and then back it up. We have a email list of 140 people, and they come to meetings. They see them up on the Zoom board at Planning Commission hearings. People write very polite letters. You have to stay. You have to show respect. These are our neighbors and volunteers in town, our friends trying to do difficult work. But we asked the town, and we helped them mold the new town plan to accommodate what we wanted. And I'm thinking of what you want to do in Underhill. You have every right to say you want something different, put it in the new town plan, back it up with a small army of supporters. That's what you need, I think. And that helped us immensely. And I thank everyone. There are several people from that army here tonight, and I'm grateful because they did change the zone to our wanting and eliminated 75% of the things we didn't like about it. So it can change. You've got to be firm on what you want.
Yeah, one more over here.
Thanks. I have two questions. Really take advantage of this opportunity. Okay, question number one is my husband and I have been looking at some of the zoning I think it's zoning in Jericho, and I struggle with like building up this like pipe dream of having an intentional community because it feels difficult to embed like the skill sets that we already have into like further financing having an intentional community. Like for example, this is a little bit silly, but like I want there to be like more coffee shop options in Jericho.
More coffee shops.
Coffee shop options, yeah. Like I really enjoy like not necessarily like talking to people, but just like sitting and seeing people. But like I can't even if I could build a community space, like I can't be selling coffee or tea on Nashville Road because it's not the zoning doesn't allow for that sort of what's the word? Yeah, commercial. And my husband is an attorney and he can't like put out a shingle on his on the house and couldn't be offering like, and I'm just gonna keep talking, sorry. He's also a really good cook and he's like, what if I was like a law firm chef where I was like cooking for my clients and like we could talk over like a really tasty meal, like really silly but creative ideas that seem impossible because of the zoning laws. And so that always gets me, like it just seems like there's so many barriers to making it work, and that sort of stifles my dream. And then the other question that I have is about, I love to envision what the space will look like. And so I'm wondering if there were like certain models that you looked at, if we were to find a perfect space already built, or if we were to build one, like I draw up images of like little structures of just little kind of tiny houses with like a bigger space in the center, or if we were to live in like a bigger multifamily home with different retrofitted flats. Like, did you read a book or see a website on like different models that if you could like create something? And then my third question. You're never going home.
Let's go back.
Third question is there a model to the agreements that you crafted up with your mates that you used, or did you just create it?
That one is quick and easy. Yes and no, and I'm happy to share them with you if that would be of value.
I would share. Me and my wife visited a lot of different communities and either visited for a short time or lived on them, and that was helpful. But then structurally, like Maple Leaf was a bankruptcy. It was right before they were going to auction it, and so it was amazing opportunity. But also, it is sort of challenging to have like something that we didn't design and wouldn't design, but is like is a place that we can create a lot and use, creatively. So the visiting communities did help a lot, not in terms of like structurally building the place, but in a lot of the structures that they have, like communication structures or like work, sort of work trade community, like things like that. Yeah, the other piece that I was thinking is, people have done a lot. Like I know in terms of like the farming world, like for butchering, like there's a lot of laws around butchering. So then people are like, well, if you buy the cow, if you own the cow, then we can butcher it for you because you own it, or things like that. And so sometimes there is like legal ways to get around things where it is legal. For us with Underhill, because we're a big property, the zoning board like wanted to help us make it work. And so like, this is what we want to do. And they were like, okay, well, if you sort of move it this way and this way, then it fits in. And so they helped us kind of create what we are, and we're not illegal, and we fit in, and they were happy to do that. So there's maybe ways where it's like, you can't sell coffee, but if everybody's like part of the club, the coffee club, then they could come and get coffee because they own the coffee because they're part of the club, something like that. And they have a punch card, or there's like potentially ways around those type of things. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, we're over time. I just want to say too, like I know I'm not a prepper, by the way, Jake. Okay, I'm just want to make that clear. No, but for all of my activist self, I also just want to put a plug for like zoning and planning and like all the volunteers, like Bill was saying, that like hold this town together. Like that is the social contract that we have with each other, right? And there's a reason maybe why we don't want commerce on Nashville Road, right? Because it's a dirt road for one, I mean, and maybe it doesn't have the like right, I don't know, emergency access or whatever. There are good reasons for a lot of these things too. I think a lot of them are overblown, and then a lot of them don't do what I think we really need to do as society. Like the agricultural zone is supposed to promote agriculture, but there's hardly any agriculture happening in Jericho anymore. So both and, I guess, but I just wanted to like acknowledge that too, that a lot of that stuff is there for a good reason, and lots of community democracy like to set all of that up, and we can be a part of that too. So
I have one last thing to say. I've been interested in intentional living for a while, and as someone with a disability who needs assistance, that's a little more complicated. But one model I heard of is called Godshui. Comes from the Netherlands, I believe. And historically, these were sort of hospices almost with co-housing. So they did have individual homes. And I'm interested in trying to make something like that work that would also work for people with disabilities. Where you could have those co-housing spaces, individual spaces, and then kind of a shared communal space. So I think that's very interesting. All right, and thank you all for coming tonight. I think this was really interesting, and I hope we can do more events like this in the future. Nice job.